The T-1 heavy tank, America's overlooked steel behemoth. When diving into the chronicles of American armored warfare, the narrative typically begins with the legendary Sherman, rumbles through the war-torn lands of Europe, and finishes with the Pershing's late-stage debut. However, lurking behind these renowned names is a massive, lesser-known figure, a titanic iron construct that might have led the charge of U.S. heavy armor, but ultimately faded into obscurity. Enter the T-1 heavy tank, America's maiden voyage into the realm of true heavy tank design. It was envisioned as a Goliath of firepower and armor, a dreadnought on treads. In reality, it was a contradiction, a tank too cumbersome, too delayed, and ultimately mismatched for the conflict it was meant to conquer. An ambitious answer to crisis. The tale of the T-1 begins during the bleak times of 1940. France had crumbled under the mechanized might of the German panzers in a matter of weeks. Britain was left standing alone, desperately guarding its shores, while the U.S., still maintaining neutrality, watched with growing concern. The German blitzkrieg had demonstrated just how effective armored warfare could be, and America's lineup of light tanks, such as the M2, suddenly seemed laughably inadequate against the formidable Panzer IV. The perceived solution was clear. America needed a heavy tank, a steel juggernaut capable of smashing through enemy defenses, withstanding enemy fire, and keeping pace with rumored German megatanks. Thus, the heavy tank project was green-lit in 1940. The result was the T-1 Heavy, a machine that showcased American engineering ambition, but also highlighted a steep learning curve in heavy tank development. Building a mechanical giant. Everything about the T-1 screamed ambition. Tipping the scales at close to 60 tons, it was a true colossus by U.S. standards at the time. The front hull boasted 75 millimeters of armor, formidable enough to shrug off most of the anti-tank weaponry the Germans had in 1940. For its armament, designers equipped it with a 76mm main gun in the turret and a secondary 37mm gun mounted coaxially, insurance in case one weapon proved lacking. Adding to its defenses, an array of machine guns protruded from its hull and turret, transforming it into a bristling, mobile fortress. Underneath its hulking body was the Wright G200 engine, an aircraft-derived powerhouse delivering 1,000 horsepower. This engine theoretically allowed the T-1 to reach speeds of up to 25 miles per hour, a respectable figure for its weight. But reality was less kind. The engine groaned under the tank's mass, suspension strained, and mechanical failures were common. Navigating this armored behemoth over bridges or soft terrain proved to be a logistical nightmare. One of its most unconventional features was the twin driving systems. Early versions of the T-1 experimented with both an electric drive system, using generators and motors, and a torque converter system. These experimental technologies aimed to manage the tank's immense power output, but proved to be overly complicated, unreliable, and prohibitively expensive to mass produce in wartime conditions. The American mouse? Not exactly. The T-1 had much in common with other contemporary heavy tank projects. In terms of size and armor, it paralleled the Soviet KV series, while its visionary scope hinted at the design philosophy behind the German Tiger. But unlike these battlefield titans, the T-1 never got its chance to prove itself. By the time the first units were ready in 1941-42, the strategic landscape had evolved. Mobility, speed, and sheer production volume had taken precedence over brute strength. The U.S. realized it could roll out 5 Shermans for the cost of a single T-1, a trade-off that was more appealing in a war driven by industrial scale. The T-1 also suffered from serious logistical drawbacks. At nearly 60 tons, it was too heavy for most European bridges. Getting it overseas posed significant shipping challenges, and its bulk made it unwieldy in the dense environments where much of the European fighting took place. Rather than serving as a war-winning weapon, it risked becoming a lumbering liability. Variants and the road to the Pershing. The T-1 project eventually produced several versions. The T-1E1 utilized an electric drive, while the T-1E2 and T-1E3 employed various torque converter and transmission setups. The T-1E2 was even briefly designated as the M6 heavy tank in 1942, with intentions of mass production. However, as the war progressed, military planners soured on that idea. The M6 was judged too heavy to be practical and too lightly armed to justify its bulk. Interestingly, the T-1's most meaningful legacy wasn't on the battlefield, but in the realm of tank development. The lessons it offered helped pave the way for the more refined and capable M26 Pershing, the true American heavy hitter of the war. In this way, the T-1 was less of a failure and more of a transitional figure, a link between an inexperienced armored corps and the battle-hardened tank forces of later years. A tank without a war. Despite several prototypes being constructed and tested, the T-1 never saw action. By 1944, as U.S. forces clashed with German Panthers and Tigers, the T-1 was already an outdated oddity, quietly shelved in favor of the more viable Pershing program. The Army no longer had the need or the patience for a 60-ton experiment that answered yesterday's questions. Today, only a few examples of the T-1 survive, preserved in museums as silent sentinels. They sit overshadowed by the Shermans that achieved victory, and the Tigers that captured the public's imagination. Yet, the T-1 remains a poignant artifact, a symbol of America's first foray into heavyweight armored warfare, ambitious but ultimately undone by its own size and timing. Legacy of an overbuilt giant. The legacy of the T-1 heavy tank is one wrapped in contradiction. It was futuristic in concept, yet outmoded upon arrival. It was robust but unwieldy, inventive but overcomplicated. Within its armored shell lay the struggles of an army learning through trial and error how to master mechanized combat. And that's precisely why the T-1 still holds value. Not all weapons need to fight to be influential. Sometimes the prototypes, the missteps, and the mechanical misfits shape history just as much as the frontline heroes. The T-1 heavy tank never roared into battle, but it helped lay the foundation for America's armored dominance.